I'm Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, April 22nd, 12:35 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream, and if you are here with us, you have a priority to choose topics of your interest to be discussed live. We can certainly discuss about everything. I may be unable to address some very specific fact patterns because we're not supposed to give free consultations over the internet according to the bar associations of Brazil and Portugal. All right, so we want to remain compliant, and you're gonna forgive me if I'm unable to answer something completely, but I promise I'm gonna do my best. And let's get started. Let's take a look at the news as usual. Let's take a look at the news in Brazil. Let's see what's going on. All right, there is this headline. It's about the Brazilian Supreme Court, and there is an entanglement of justices of the Brazilian Supreme Court in the failure, in the bankruptcy of Banco Master. And if you've been here with us in other live streams, you know it's a recurring topic, a very recurring topic. And that's one more chapter in this odyssey, if you will. And this is Minister Toffoli, one of the justices. He is declaring himself as partial, in a sense that he's not going to participate in the adjudication, right? And this is something, like from a general perspective, as something positive, because he's saying, listen, I'm not going to be able to be impartial, and therefore I'm not going to participate in the adjudication of several cases related to Banco Master. All right, there is now another bank that's involved in the bankruptcy process. That's BRB. There are lawyers being arrested as well. There are many people being arrested because it was something really big that involved not only the bank itself, but many people at different places. Again, there are people at the Supreme Court that seem to be involved to some degree. There are people in the executive power as well, in the Congress. There are governors. There are all types of people involved to some degree with Banco Master. All right, so this is the main headline. You can also see here, like President Trump, and I think that's a Secretary of. I'm not sure if he's like the head of Pentagon or what is the role of this gentleman. And the headline here, it's saying, this is an opinion by this writer saying, Iran has understood something that the United States, with all, its defense budget, cannot understand. That's I guess an interesting headline for people to click and check what else they're saying over there. Now, very interesting, and this is a topic sometimes we discuss here live. Look how much state on the screen Estadão is dedicating to, bodybuilding or, gym, training. And this is something very typical of Brazilians, right? This concern about our physical appearance, for good and maybe, for not so good. How can I say? There are positive aspects to it and not so positive aspects to it. Like in Brazil, I have this understanding that there is much more social pressure for people to conform physically than what you're going to see in other countries, in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere. Like in Brazil, you are supposed to be in good shape, to look good, and to take really good care of yourself. All right, but that's a recurring topic. And you're going to see, like sports, You're gonna see other types of news over here. And I guess that's it for today. Let's remind you about Remax Nomad States. They are our partner for real estate listing. So if you are interested in buying properties in Brazil, you need to get a short list, you need a trustworthy realtor. That's an option for you to consider. And there you go. This is like the slide with Remax Nomad States contact information, WhatsApp number, and their email. So if it's interesting to you, make sure to take a screenshot and use as you need it. All right, let's take a look at the board and see what we have in terms of topics of your interest. And don't be shy, make sure to write over here. This live stream is for you, it's not for other people, it's for you who are here live with us. And we have a Jonathan. Olá, Luciano, good to hear your wisdom and expertise again. Thank you, Jonathan, good to see you around. Marisa Navas, olá, Dr. Luciano, ansiosos pela sua live. Thank you so much for the support, Marisa and Ricardo. And very interesting, I just had I think it was an hour and a half meeting about our activities in Portugal. I was discussing with Professor Larissa Bello, like she's a major authority in not only immigration but all things legal in Portugal, and we had such a nice meeting. So foi muito bom, tivemos uma reunião muito longa com a professora Larissa Bello de Portugal, cerca de 1h30 antes de começarmos aqui a nossa live, Marisa e Ricardo. Muito obrigado pela participação de vocês. All right, Jonathan, what are the ramifications of Brazil and China new trade deal when the United States frowns and attacks countries in any ways who move away from the US dollar and dominance in their economies? Jonathan, yeah, so listen, I think Brazil is playing its cards, like right, because Brazil tries to not antagonize the United States, and at the same time will jump in whenever there is an opportunity for additional trade with other countries. So yes, China is nowadays a major presence in Brazil, and Brazil is taking, this opportunity of, accommodating Chinese interests in the country, Jonathan. And I guess it's good for development, right? Like Brazil is still a developing country. I guess, is a developing country not so much for, money, income, revenues, because Brazil is one of the top, probably top 10 or top 12. It depends on when you are checking the rankings, but is one of the top 12 economies globally. But unfortunately, we have a pervasive problem of corruption, right? And this is corruption not only at the government level, but socially, I would say, and that's probably our main challenge, Jonathan. We don't have any shortage of money in Brazil. Actually, there is a lot of money in Brazil. Again, 10th or 12th largest economy globally. So the problem is, I think, culturally, and not to just blame politicians. I think it's very easy for us to say, well, politicians, look at these bad people. But in my understanding, I think it is something more sociological, and who knows? But we do have, people trying to do the right thing. We particularly, right, we try to, always play clean in our litigation here at the firm, and I was actually discussing about that yesterday with someone about litigation in general. Because again, there is substantial corruption in Brazil, but in the legal system, my experience is that, believe it or not, in most of our cases, the disputes, they are resolve it technically, and I don't see any signs of bribes or problems. So listen, there are many problems in Brazil, but I think actually most people are trying to do the right thing. Yes, Jonathan, but yes, you know what? Like disputes between the, these largest players like the United States and China, it's, those disputes, they are actually good for Brazil because then Brazil has more room, to develop its own plans, pick the currency and kind of play a game, right? Like, and say, listen, you guys want me to be in your circle of influence. Guess what? You need to invest money. You need to respect us. You need to give us things that we need. And that's an interesting question, Jonathan. Matt Gaines, happy Earth Day, Dr. Oliveira and chat group. Thank you so much, Matt and Adrian, to participate and to remind us about the Earth Day. That's something big for Brazil. This morning I was like doing some review on a specific law, a specific Brazilian law addressing the purchase of rural land by foreign citizens. And Brazil has a kind of mixed regime that is going to allow foreign citizens to buy rural land in Brazil, but to a certain limit, right? So it's not like you can buy whatever you want. Yes, you can buy some land, but there are limitations to how much land and how much a foreign citizen can do with the land. So that's an interesting connection to the Earth Day. There was a reading I was having this morning. Sean, boa tarde, Luciano. Boa tarde, Sean. After hiring your law firm for the retirement visa and applying in Brazil, how much control would we have regarding which tax the residency begins or scheduling the interview? Sean, that's an interesting question. So if we're talking about the retirement visa, right? The retirement visa or residency, right? It's a visa if you start this process through a consulate, and it's going to be a residency if you skip the consulate altogether and apply while physically in Brazil. So it could be either a visa, it could be either a residency. And, either way, yes, you're going to have like an appointment at a Brazilian Federal Police, and that's going to be the common step to both routes. So even if you are applying to a consulate, you're going to need to register with the Brazilian Federal Police. If you are applying while physically in Brazil, you're also going to need to register with the Brazilian Federal Police. When you register with the Brazilian Federal Police, that's when typically and it is going to depend on the state, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But let's say in São Paulo or Rio, if you attended the appointment and if you have all the paperwork, you're gonna have the resident number issued on the spot if all the documentation is good. Not in Santa Catarina, right? In Santa Catarina, typically you're going to attend the appointment. They are going to, build a file with the paperwork that you brought. They are going to troubleshoot questions that they may have. And then they are going to send this to a chief of police to review and sign all the authorizations of residency down the line, which could be, 30 days later. So it's going to depend on the state. But once you get the resident number, that's when your residency starts. In our understanding, just because you got the residency, it doesn't mean you're going to become a tax resident on the spot, because this residency is temporary. It's a temporary residency. If it was a permanent residency, like the one you typically get through marriage, yes, then you would become a tax resident on the spot. But for the retirement track, you typically get a 1 year, right? When you apply in Brazil, you get 1 year. When you apply in the United States, for instance, typically you get 2 years. And then those 1 or 2 years, they are going to be temporary residency. And in our understanding, until you have been for 183 days in the country in any given 365. So it's not a calendar year, it's a moving bracket trying to catch you until you cross that number. You don't become a tax resident, okay? And then what you could do, like, to plan when you're gonna trigger the tax residency, is go through the Brazil Retirement Track application, get your residency, but avoid staying in Brazil for over 183 days in any given 365. And therefore, by doing that, you can, decide when you actually gonna become a tax resident. All right. In terms of scheduling the appointment, I don't like to tell you that you have much flexibility. And there was a discussion I was having with our partner attorney in Portugal, and I was saying, listen, U.S. clients, we love U.S. clients. Like they represent probably over 90% of our clients, but they have sometimes an expectation that the receiving country is gonna be bending backwards to receive them as an immigrant, and that's not the ideal mindset, right? Like, I think you should work with what's available, and that's how it typically works, either in Brazil or in Portugal, right? Like, you need to get you need to work with what you get from the immigration authority. So, yes, you can, potentially work on your planning to decide when you're going to become a tax resident. But in terms of the appointment, we don't like to, give you like any flexibility, if you will, for the appointment, because, nowadays, even more so, it's difficult to get an appointment. So the idea here is, like, if you get an appointment, like, you need to take that appointment and proceed full force instead of, being picky in terms of dates when you're going to be in Brazil and so on. It just makes this whole journey too difficult and not, I would say, appropriate for an immigration to another country, if you will, Sean. All right. Aaron, how's it going, Aaron? When is exchange rate going back up? Aaron, I'm not following. Has it dropped below 5 reais? A dollar? Let's take a look together. Aaron is calling attention to the exchange rate. Yes, it has fallen below. And this is the one, I typically follow, the exchange rate through UOL. UOL is a major internet portal or newspaper, like they are the portal for Folha de São Paulo newspaper, is a São Paulo entity, and they typically track, the exchange rates here on top of the screen. I think you can see here. So as of today, $1 is buying 4.969 reais, and not long ago, a dollar was buying like 5 reais or 5.6 reais, so 5 reais and 60 cents of reais. So yes, dollar seems to be, kind of not in great shape. But one thing I'm gonna tell you, Aaron, is that we never know where the exchange rate is gonna go, right? Because it really depends on so much. And to be honest with you, I don't think, I have any clue if the rate is gonna keep, falling, or if it's gonna revert. And I don't think anyone else knows as well. So what some clients, and that's an interesting point, because this has been a recurring topic in our consultations. Some clients, they say, listen, I don't want to, bet in favor of the US dollar or against the US dollar. I just want to hedge. My living in Brazil. So, they're sending some money, even if they're in the process of migrating to Brazil. Same thing to some clients of ours going to Portugal. They are sending, some money ahead of time, to kind of get local currency, particularly if they are buying property, right? Like you don't want to have a big currency exchange problem when you are entering into a contract, and many people are hedging themselves. Now, whenever someone says, well, I'm going to send money in Brazil to invest, like because of the high interest rates, I particularly do not like this idea, because there is so much that can happen in between that could, basically wipe out any interest gains that you would have. So I don't like this idea, but I do understand those clients who are sending money to Brazil, to hedge themselves against, like, a major devaluation of the U.S. dollar, right? And sometimes when I'm gonna have, a quick lunch, most of the time I'm gonna have lunch in my office, and then I'm gonna watch some YouTube videos, and there is always this kind of recurring conversation that the U.S. economy, the U.S. currency is gonna crash eventually, and there is a whole plan for that to happen. I don't know. I also like to take into consideration Warren Buffett's saying, like don't bet against the United States, right? So there are those two different views. One view that because of that, the United States currency is doomed and it's gonna devaluate big time. And then there is another, a side that says yes, but listen, still the United States is the most solid nation or economy globally, whether you like it or not, right? So who knows? Like, I'm not an economist, but just throwing some things out there, Aaron. But interesting topic indeed. Jonathan, Luciano, when I first contacted you over 2 years ago, the currency exchange was almost 6 to 1. Oh, look at that. That's such an interesting memory, Jonathan. Yes, almost 6 to 1. Now it's only 4.96 to 1. Is it a buyer's market for buying property and retirement visa? In terms of buyer's market, right, like aside of the currency exchange, Jonathan, like typically for foreign citizens, when they are buying on a cash basis, it is typically a buyer's market, because you come into a market in which most of the buyers, they are going to need finance. So if you come in with cash from the United States, whether it's a loan that you're getting in the United States, or whether it's like, let's say you sold a house in the United States and you got your equity in cash, so typically it's going to be a buyer's market. Now, in terms of the currency exchange, you are right. It was $6 to $1, almost, right? I think it never got to 6 reais per dollar. It maybe was 5.7. I don't know. That's the memory I have. But something I can tell you, there was much more time in which the exchange was lower than 4 reais per dollar, right? So what I want to say is that nowadays is not as good as it was back then, but I guarantee that today is better than it was most of the time in the past. So from this perspective, even from a currency exchange, yes, I think it's a good time to buy properties in Brazil. And if you have questions about the currency exchange, I think xe.com, that's one website I do check every now and then, and maybe we can do that together, right? Instead of just trying to, figure this out from memory, right? Memory is so flawed, but we can take a look at xe.com. All right, xe.com, and then like you can typically see so $1 to the Brazilian currency is 4.96. Let's take a look if we can get a view chart. All right, let's see how far we can go in terms of this chart. Can we change the timeline? Track currency. I don't know. I think in the past you could pick, like, if you wanna, yeah, you can pick over here, like 10 years, right? All right. So if you look like April 2023, it was April 2023. Yes, so it was basically the same thing, right? If you look over here, April 22, it was less. It was 4.6 reais. And then all the way before May 2020, you're going to see that, like the average was under 4 reais. Okay, so this is before, this was January of 2020. You would buy 4 reais with $1, and then if you go back to 2019, 3 reais 96, and like 2017, 3 reais for $1, right? So in my understanding, like the way I read this graphic is that things are not bad at all. All right, things are not bad at all. But I do understand, like, for those of you who are tracking the US dollar, and if you remember about, when you could buy almost 6 reais for $1, like, buying 5 reais for $1 may not sound such a big deal. But in my memory, because like we've been living through all of those years, to be able to buy 5 reais for $1, it still sounds like a great deal. Jonathan, but interesting take. That's an interesting question indeed. Sean, thank you again. If I apply for the retirement visa and supplement retirement income with a CD income, does the age of the CD matter? All right. So, Sean, it's difficult to tell you if they are going to pay attention to that. And the way I can try to explain to you is like this is going to be reviewed by either the consulate or by someone physically in Brazil. If you apply through a consulate, it's going to be like a consular officer. If you apply physically in Brazil, it's going to be like an immigration department. And I would assume that most people would not have like, any meaningful understanding of how CDs work. They're going to be basically looking at your drawing income. They need to make sure that you're drawing that, like it cannot be potential income like it happens to Portugal. Portugal, by the way, they look at potential income. Now, Brazil is going to be looking at what you're actually drawing. So, yes, I think it's a valid question because you could have like, a CD that is going to be, giving you money for a short period of time. You could have another CD that is like, for a longer period of time. But typically, the analysis is going to focus on how much you're getting per month. And, if the amount of money that you have like in your savings looks reasonable. Okay. And it's not like, let's say, easy for a Brazilian immigration officer to have an understanding of the CD dynamics. So I think the most important aspects are going to be how much you have in total income. Remember that most of your income, in our understanding, it should be like traditional retirement income. And then if you are complementing with CD, here at the firm, we are willing to file cases with up to half the retirement income being like, passive income, as long as at least half the income being presented is from like traditional sources. And by traditional, we like a lot like Social Security, pension plans, and disability, right? These are the 3 things we like the most. And then as a second tier, you're going to have, those other maybe traditional for the US, not so much for Brazil. the other types of retirement accounts, such as IRAs, 401ks, and other creative stuff from the US, right? So you can never tell. There is no like matrix that Brazil is publishing for anyone to evaluate where a CD is going to fall in between. All right, but yes, I mean, if you have a meaningful CD, if you can show that you're drawing the income, at least from our application perspective, it works well, and it gives you a good shot. All right, Aaron, the exchange rate has dropped 10% since my last large transfer. Yes, Aaron, it looks like you had a good timing. James Rochas, olá, bom dia, amigo. Bom dia, James. About União Estável, is it enough if I have a rental contract with my Brazilian partner, or more proof necessary? All right, James, I would assume you're asking about the residency through stable union, right? Because you're not talking about residency, you're just asking about União Estável in general. I'm going to assume over here that your question is about an application for residency in Brazil. I don't think a rental contract is going to be enough. Okay, I think you're going to need more proofs. Maybe the rental contract, it could be one more evidence, right? Like one of the first things here at the firm, because like the requirements, they are changing often, so I'm not going to talk about the enforced requirements from the Brazilian immigration. I'm going to talk about our standards here at the firm. Here at the firm, first thing, we're not going to take a case unless you have like paperwork supporting the União Estável, right? So if it is just like a common law marriage means you've been living with someone, it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, but you have zero paperwork, right? That type of case we don't take here at the firm. We would require at least like the civil union type of paperwork. And in addition to that, a couple of evidences. Some of the evidences we work here is going to be like life insurance with, one partner having the other as a beneficiary. If you have like children together, right, that could be another piece of evidence. But if you have that, if the child was born in Brazil, maybe you're better off just applying through childbirth. So we actually require at least two requirements, James, on top of the paperwork for the União Estável. And then we typically discuss with our clients in a call to see the things that they have already and whether we can use it or not. As background information, I think it was last year, time flies, but I think it was either June or July of 2025. There was an operation from the Brazilian immigration chasing fraudsters on that front, because there is a lot of fraud, as you may imagine, with the so-called União Estável, because nowadays, in a very weird manner, the interpretation is that União Estável and marriage in Brazil, they are on the same level from a constitutional perspective. That's one of those kind of weird outcomes coming from our highest courts. But the point is, União Estável is very easy for people to get. So the Brazilian Federal Police, they've been chasing applicants and they've been chasing attorneys who are, popping out lots of residency applications. So in our case, we try to be more conservative, to have like a strong paperwork is not going to only reflect a genuine União Estável, but is also going to have a good shot at the residency, despite this kind of concerning background of this track, right? Particularly because of last year, there was a lot of talk about fraud in União Estável cases, James. So yes, that's our take on it. James Alante, boa tarde, tudo bem? Hello, James. Welcome to the live. I am in the process of doing the digital nomad residency with your firm. Does the 183-day tax residency begin when I first entered Brazil, or after I am approved for the digital nomad residency while in Brazil? James, it starts. Let's put it in a different way. The digital nomad, in our understanding, is going to be neutral. It's going to be neutral from a taxation perspective. What do I mean by neutral? It's going to mean it is neutral. It doesn't cause taxation, but it doesn't shield you from taxation. All right. So, in our understanding, the 183-day rule is a presence rule, right? Like they're not looking at your status; they're looking at your physical body in the country. Okay, so whether you have a digital nomad or not, that's when the count is going to start. So I assume here in your question, the answer would be that it would count. It would count from the moment in which you enter the country. It has no connection to when you got the digital nomad visa. All right, James, and thank you for being using our service. Very happy to have you on board. Let's take a look and see what else we have. All right, Sean, regarding your comment about physical fitness in Brazil, I noticed the gyms in large cities are much more crowded than in the USA and much younger people on average. Nice sharing, Sean. And I'm curious, like maybe as a follow-up question to you, like where do you typically go to a gym in Brazil? Because it's gonna change according to where you are. And I would say, the more urban the area, the worse the situation is gonna be. One place in which, I absolutely hate going to the gym is gonna be the south zone of Rio de Janeiro, right? So the south zone of Rio de Janeiro, maybe that's why you see so many people, right, jogging, like, by the coastline, practicing, sports, playing volleyball, playing soccer, exercising with their own bodies without, machines and so on. In Leblon is just horrible. Like if you go to a gym, they are gonna charge you a large fee by Brazilian standards, and the gym is going to be absolutely packed. Like if you try to go 6 a.m. in the morning, it's going to be packed. If you go 7 a.m., the same thing. If you go 8 a.m., same thing. The only way for you to avoid like this crowded environment is going to be for you to go like 5 a.m., like the latest, or for you to go at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, right? So that's going to be Leblon or the south zone of Rio de Janeiro as a whole. Now, if you are more like in outside of those major urban centers, it's going to be a much better environment, right? So in São Paulo, for instance, I do like, like some suburbs, like particularly the cities of Vinhedo and Valinhos, and they have wonderful gyms that are going to be, reasonable even during peak time. But, if you go to São Paulo, if you are, in one of those very urban areas, closer to Avenida Paulista, closer to Jardins, unfortunately, is going to be the very same reality that you would face in Rio de Janeiro as well. Jonathan, yes, I used the XE app. Yes, Jonathan. So, yes, I hope, like the sharing was helpful. Like when you see, like, like the more longer term graphic of the exchange rate, you see that actually nowadays the exchange rate is not bad at all. All right. Now, another thing you can, take out of that particular graphic is the fact that you never know what is if there is a baseline, if you will, right? Like, I mean, nobody can tell you that there is a baseline. You can never say that, if 5 reais for a dollar is a baseline, or maybe it's just like something temporary, and the correct baseline would be 7 reais for a dollar, or maybe, going back to 3 reais for a dollar. Okay, I don't have any predictions that I would share, but something that seems to be the case is that there is a trend for the currency exchange rate to be in a certain bracket for a while, and then maybe there is some global event, or maybe there is some major policy implemented by either Brazil or the United States that's going to impact and change the currency exchange rate from one bracket to another. And then once the exchange rate gets into a new bracket, it looks like there is a trend by the players to keep the currency exchange in that bracket. Right now, what could be concerning about today's rate is that it looks like it is removing the exchange from the 5 to 6 bracket, putting the US dollar in the 4 to 5 bracket, right? So if for some reason people start to believe that 4 to 5 is the correct bracket, maybe that's how the market is going to operate. Who knows, right? Again, I'm not an economist, and these are just conjectures. James Rochas, I am already under digital nomad visa living in Brazil. Will it not be easier to convert to União Estável since I want to live here with my girlfriend? James, listen, União Estável, it does get you access to permanent residency, just like marriage. However, I'm going to emphasize what I told you before. União Estável is pretty much nowadays, from the Brazilian legal perspective, the same thing as marriage. So the question that you need to ask yourself is whether you want to enter into a marriage, right? So it's a pretty big deal to enter into a marriage, and it's equally a pretty big deal to enter into a união estável. All right. Now, listen, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about your girlfriend. I'm just going to say that we have many cases here at the firm in which we are representing a client who's fighting, like many asks coming out of a união estável, right? And união estável, they are going to end. They are going to end eventually, right? For sure. It could last 10 years, it could last 20 years, but it's going to end eventually, right? It's just a matter of reality. So once it ends, what's going to happen then is typically not favorable to a foreign citizen, because then the Brazilian national is going to, very fast start to ask for everything that they can under Brazilian law. So that could include, alimony, it could be, support for pets. It could be, access to whatever assets you acquire during the duration of the União Estável. So I'm not saying that to say you should not get into a União Estável. I'm just mentioning that to highlight that União Estável is pretty much the same thing as getting into a marriage. All right, so just keep that in mind, James. All right, Sean, regarding your comments about retirement visa and half of income proof coming from retirement account distributions, is there a percentage of retirement income that gives me a material better chance? So, Sean, for applicants from the United States, in our experience, right, like as long as you're meeting the requirements, you have a solid chance. Okay, so we don't see in our practice that presenting a much higher income is going to give you a much better shot. What I think a higher income or a higher percentage of, let's say, more traditional retirement income is gonna help with your case is because then the agent doesn't need to be thinking too much, Okay, they don't need to think too much. They don't need to take your case to a supervisor. Maybe the supervisor is in a bad day and they don't actually look at your case and just say, well, deny because we have questions about it, right? Um, and by the way, typically they don't deny at the right off the bat. If they think your income is not compliant, they are gonna give you an opportunity to present your income in a compliant manner. The downside is that they typically are not gonna tell you what's wrong, right? They're just gonna say, listen, like these specific requirements of the application, they were not met, and you need to fix that in a given period of time. They don't tell you like, well, we don't like your CD, we don't like this percentage. It's more like open-ended. Maybe for liability issues, right? Like they don't wanna, and also because maybe they don't wanna disclose the currently enforced requirements, so they just throw there and see if you can change things in a way that's going to make it look more compliant. But typically you have a second shot, all right? But in our experience, by presenting a higher total retirement income, or by using a higher percentage of traditional retirement income compared to your non-traditional retirement income, is not really decisive, if you will. I think the upside is that you can avoid questions being asked by the agent. All right, Sean. Regarding the gyms, my experience is mostly in Maceió and Moema Vila Nova. They are crowded, but Brazilians are much more likely to offer to rotate sets on a machine than people in the US. That's true, Sean. Nice sharing. And yes, they are crowded. Indeed. Thank you, Sean. Don't forget to like the live stream. Yes, if you're here with us, if you're enjoying our conversation, don't forget to like. When you like our live stream, you help our business, and you also help other people just like you to find this content. Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you, Matt. Matt is buying me lunch. Happy Earth Day. Thank you, Matt and Adrian. You guys are the best. I love you guys. Thank you for buying me lunch. I really appreciate that. Okay, so let's see what else we have. Let's see if we have anything here in the pipeline. Anything in our all right, Yui. Olá, Luciano. Olá, Yui. Yui, remind me if I'm correct or not. I think you are our client, right? And welcome to the live stream. If you are our client, thank you so much for showing up, Yui. Jonathan, Luciano, I use language learning apps, YouTube videos, and other avenues. What is your recommendation or learning Portuguese? Jonathan, that's a good question, right? And it may change. The answer may change according to your style, right? Like some people, they believe they are not gonna be able to talk unless they learn grammar. I particularly don't like that approach much, because when you start to stick to the rules, yes, you're gonna speak a very correct form of Portuguese, but it typically doesn't help you with fluency, because then you're gonna be, every time you're gonna talk, you're gonna need to remember about what you're saying, how it's being said, and so on. So I particularly like when people use like those online lessons, like you get a Portuguese speaker. It doesn't really matter if they are like a professional instructor or not. But as long as you can practice and engage into a conversation, I think that's a very effective manner for you to learn Portuguese. And of course, like if you have a Portuguese speaker on your side, then another strategy is to basically, stop talking in English and make it work in Portuguese, right? Like, I mean, of course, like at the beginning, you may need to, change it back to English, but as long as you make it like a deal that, from now on, we're just going to communicate in Portuguese, this is going to increase your learning process substantially, okay? So that's another strategy that I see working. Something that it may be helpful from a psychological perspective. Brazil has continental dimensions, and there is a lot of variation in the way we say things depending on the state, on the city, on the region in Brazil, right? And I can give an example, like in São Paulo, when we're talking informally, typically we don't use plural for we don't use words in plural. We're going to keep it in singular even when we're talking about things that are obviously plural. For instance, if I'm going to say I'm going to have a few beers this afternoon, right? We would say in Portuguese, we're going to have a few beer. Like we wouldn't say beers, like we would just say beer. That's how we say in Portuguese. That doesn't happen at all in Rio de Janeiro. In Rio de Janeiro, people, they stick to the plural. But in São Paulo, it's almost like like a sign that you belong to the São Paulo tribe to avoid using words in the plural. Now, of course, if you are in a work environment, you're not going to be talking informally. You're probably going to use the plural. This is just one example. So this highlights that, like, is not so much about grammar, but is also about the reality of the language. Okay, so, I think the more you practice, or maybe if you let go a little bit of the structure, it helps you with fluency in general. Okay. So these are just some tips, Jonathan, that I have from my experience with other languages, if you will. Yui at James Rochas just get married in Utah only and used that dog to register in Brazil. All right. Again, Yui, yes, there is the so-called Utah route, right? We have many clients who did use. It's pretty easy for marriage. The problem here, Yui, and that's what I was sharing with James Rochas, is like to enter into a marriage, right? So putting in a different way to get into a marriage or to get into a união estável, super easy. The outcomes of such act, they are going to happen in the future, and that's something you need to think ahead of time for sure. All right, and yes, Aaron, best way to learn Portuguese is to just try it. There you go, Aaron. Yes, to practice. And Jonathan, like if you are in Brazil, guess what? Like, I mean, particularly if you go to the Northeast or the North, then most people, they are not going to speak English. So you're going to need to, practice your Portuguese no matter what. Otherwise, you're not going to have a cafezinho. You're not going to be able to buy a pãozinho at the padaria, at the bakery, right? So you're going to need to practice no matter what. And then the Portuguese is going to happen more naturally. Aaron, the same way a Brazilian say good instead of good is endearing. Your mistakes in speaking Portuguese will be forgiven. Exactly. There's some stuff like when we say chew, right? Like it looks like we're saying chew, like, you're chewing something, like we say chew. That's like how we Brazilians say. We don't say two, right? That's probably the closer to the right pronunciation, number two. We like to say chew, number two. And if we're just talking fast, guess what? We're going to change our mindset to say chew. I don't know. It's just like, certain ways that we are, we are educated when we are young to pronunciate like certain letters, and then this is going to show up in the letter. Nice point, Aaron. Exactly. Many things you guys going to say. For instance, for bread, right? That's a recurring joke that I see. I don't know if it's funny or not, but like bread in Portuguese is pão, right? That's how we pronounce pão. And for some reason, U.S. citizens, they are going to pronounce pau instead of pão. They are unable to say pão. They are going to end up saying pau, and pau is a nickname for the masculine penis, right? Like, so people are going to make fun of foreign citizens whenever they go to the bakery. They are asking, for bread, and then Brazilians are going to laugh at it. They say, "Well, he's asking for a penis." Like, I mean, I think it's a kind of, stupid joke, but that's a recurring joke, and that's going to highlight the different pronunciations that different people are going to have for similar words, right? Okay, I think that's it for today. Now, I have a good news for you. We're going to have our Sunday live stream this Sunday. That's the last Sunday we have in the month of April. That's going to be our second Sunday live stream. We are trying to keep consistently up with the Wednesday live streams, and 2 Sundays with live stream on 2 Sundays a month. So we had a Sunday live stream this month. So the second one is going to be naturally this Sunday, because this is the last Sunday of the month. So I really hope to see you there. If you wanna, go to our channel, click on the notify me. So when the live stream starts on Sunday, you're gonna be notified. You're not gonna miss the live stream. I wanna thank you for your participation. Very interesting questions, very interesting perspectives, very important perspectives, because otherwise it's just a lawyer sharing boring legal stuff over here. So when I have you guys here sharing, nice things about a life in Brazil, or nice aspects of your journey immigrating to Brazil, that makes our live stream much more interesting. Really appreciate that. Hoping that you're going to be with us on Sunday, and wishing you a blessed rest of your day.